Hey, what's up? I'm super excited that you've chosen to try this out at home. This is going to be an interactive teaching video where I'll pose the discussion questions and then I'll throw up a pause logo with the question on the page for you to discuss as a family. After you unpause it, I'll go over some of the answers. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to do a review of the last 3-week series that we had with our guest speaker, Steve Holiday. We're going to take a look at each of the illustrations that he used to teach us about sex. So for example, the first one is you can learn a lot about sex from a chocolate bunny. And then I'll throw up a pause logo and you'll discuss as a family what you remember about that illustration and what the takeaway was, what the connection was to what you can learn about sex. So let's practice the pause thing. Here's the logo. Ready? Did you get it? Alright, well that's how long it's going to be, just about 2 seconds. And along with it will be the question that I just asked on the screen that you can read while it's paused. Alright, here we go. Illustration number 1. What can you learn about sex from a chocolate bunny? In this first illustration, Steve gave Skylar a chocolate bunny and asked her to give him the chocolate. He told her that she could keep the bunny, but he just wanted the chocolate. She couldn't separate the chocolate from the bunny because it's part of what it was. In the same way, we can't separate our sexuality from who we are. It's central to our being. Illustration number 2. What can you learn about sex from a box of cookies? In this illustration, Steve had a box of cookies laid out on the stage. He asked the crowd what type of cookie was their favorite. He got shows of hands for several different cookies, and the basic point was that everybody had their own preference. The take-home was that attraction is normal. You like what you like. Don't get discouraged if you haven't been able to remember the take-home of either of these first two. This was like 4 weeks ago that this happened. You'll probably remember this next one. What can you learn about sex from a pool stick? This is where that first lesson started getting fun, because we started talking about anatomy. Steve brought out a 2-piece pool stick that had a male end and a female end. He talked about how they were designed to fit together perfectly. And when they were fit together, they could accomplish what they were designed to do. In the same way, God designed the male and female anatomy to fit together perfectly through sex as part of His design. It's the oneness that's the key. Alright, what can you learn about sex from a game of checkers? In this illustration, Jace came on stage to help Steve play the world's fastest game of checkers. The game started out normal with both of them playing quickly and making fast decisions, but soon Steve started cheating, making quadruple jumps and backwards jumps and sideways jumps that weren't legal. Jace lost the game, and afterwards Steve asked him what he thought about it or if he felt like it was fun. Jace said, "No, because you cheated." The illustration was that the game has established rules. If you follow them, then it's great. But if you break them, then it changes the game. The same is true with sex. Sex has established boundaries and rules that we follow. And when we follow them, it works perfectly how God designed it. But when we start breaking the rules, then it changes the game. Hey, if you're having trouble remembering what the illustration point is during the time that the screen is paused, I want to invite you to pause the video after I'm done explaining each illustration and then discuss it as a family. Here's the next one. What can you learn about sex from a can of Play-Doh? This gets kind of technical, so bear with me as I struggle to remember all of it. Steve brought out a can of Play-Doh and smashed it onto a plate. Then he put his handprint in the Play-Doh. He showed it to us and we saw that it had his perfect fit of his hand pressed into the Play-Doh all the way down to the finest detail of his fingerprints. Now the way that God created our sexual arousal template to work is when we experience any kind of sexual experience that makes an imprint on our brains. The way that God designed it is for it to be a man and a woman coming together when they're married, and each time after that, it is the perfect fulfillment of how He designed it to work. Now, Steve made other imprints with different things, like the Mr. Potato Head hand, the lips, and the eyes, and that was representing different things that we experience through life. The first time we see something sexual, whether it be a magazine at the grocery store or whether it be someone wearing something that is very flattering to their figure. The lips were representing when we experience our first sexual experience with our mouth, and that could be a kiss or experiencing something else like oral sex. And then the hand was representing when we experience our first sexual experience regarding touch. So that could be someone putting their hand on our shoulder or caressing our neck, et cetera, et cetera. So the point was that once all that stuff happens, and then we get married, and then there's that handprint that comes together. He took it away and showed his handprint along with all that other stuff. His hand didn't fit perfectly, and that's because every sexual experience that we ever have leaves an imprint on our brain. It causes us to want to experience that same experience again. It's just how God created us. So if we go around saying, well, I really enjoy making out with people, but I'm not going to have sex, and we just go through high school making out with as many people as we can, thinking that it's not going to have an effect later on down the road with how we experience sex with our spouse, we're sorely mistaken, because every experience that we have that is sexual in nature that causes a sexual arousal is making an imprint on our brain. That can kind of help answer the question that many of us have of why do I want to experience that again? For instance, if someone sees pornography, their brain instantly wants to see that again. And so when we struggle with figuring out why we have these desires to experience something that we know may be wrong, outside of the confines of, outside of the context of marriage, that's an answer as to why we want to experience that. This was a pretty depressing illustration, but Steve wanted to emphasize the final point, that we serve a God who can renew our minds. God can reverse any damage that's been done. And in a world that we live in today, it's extremely rare if a person can make it all the way to marriage without any imprints having been made on their sexual arousal template. So we really have to rely on God in the broken world that we live in. Next up is the cycle of addiction. Let me just list off the different things in the cycle. You can learn a lot about sex from pool noodles, from binoculars, from chocolate milk, from little 5-pound weights, from holding a Bible up over your head like this. Let's pause and talk about those and see if you can recount how the cycle works. All right, bear with me on this one, and forgive me for breaking the awesome eye contact that we have going on. I'm going to have to look at my notes for this one to make sure I get the wording right. Let's start with the pool noodles. Sarah came on stage to help with this aspect of the cycle. On the pool noodles were written the words, painful thoughts and negative feelings. Steve stood right in front of Sarah and said, hey, anything that is above your chin level, you can hit it as hard as you can whenever you can reach it. And so he stood up. She hit him on the head kind of gently, but the point was that it was painful enough that Steve couldn't bear it and had to squat down low. Now, when he was in the position of a squat, that represented the anxiety. So while that was going on, it was too hard for him to maintain that position, so he had to stand up, and when he stood up, he got hit on the head again by those painful thoughts and negative feelings. And so we had to squat back down. After a while, quads started burning, had to stand up. And that illustrated how that stage of anxiety and painful thoughts and negative feelings send us over to the next step in the cycle, which was represented by the binoculars. Now, Josh came on the stage to look through the binoculars to try and find a ball that we were throwing around in the audience. This illustrated how we become preoccupied with escape. So, in other words, I can't pay attention to what's going on in the moment. I'm distracted. I pass up things that I would normally enjoy. I know I need to leave for work in 5 minutes, but I really want to try and find how I can act out. And so that led us to the acting out phase of the cycle, where Brandon came on the stage and got to drink as much chocolate milk as he wanted. Now, he only drank one bottle. I've seen it before where Steve has done this presentation where someone drank like 2.5 full deals, full little pints of chocolate milk, and were on the verge of throwing up. It was pretty hilarious. But that illustrates how we love, whatever behavior that the chocolate milk is representing. We love the chocolate milk. It's so good, but at some point it becomes too much and it stops being fun after we've had our fill. And that sends us to despair, the despair stage of the cycle, which was represented by the weights that Jace had to come up and hold out like this. It was funny that Steve told him, hey, when you get to 1 million, you can put them down. That burning sensation that he was getting in his shoulders represented the despair, like I'll never be able to get out of this. And that can lead to either a resolve, or it can lead back to more painful thoughts and negative feelings. Now, the resolve was where Rhett came on stage and held the Bible in a really awkward position. He held it up like this and twisted his head around, and at some point it got heavy, and his neck started hurting to the point where, okay, he couldn't hold that position forever. And that's what we experience when we're in the cycle of addiction. We say, hey, I'm going to quit. I'm going to go cold turkey. I'm just going to pray and focus on God, and it's going to be able to stop. But that always leads back to the painful thoughts, negative feelings, anxiety, because it can't last. We can't hold the position. So this kind of illustrated the cycle of addiction and how it's literally a cycle that people try to escape all the time by themselves by just saying, I'm going to try harder, I'm going to try to focus on God, and it doesn't work. The only way that we can get out of the cycle is to seek help. We'll talk about that later. But the whole cycle is driven by anxiety. It's really interesting. Anxiety was especially at the point where Steve was in the squat position, but if we look at the cycle, we can see how there's anxiety where Josh was trying to find the ball through the binoculars when it became difficult for him to do that. There was anxiety when Brandon stopped enjoying the chocolate milk, and there was anxiety when Jace was holding the weights. There was anxiety with the neck. It was all driven by anxiety. And that's further proof that it's something that we need to seek help for when we're stuck in that cycle. Okay, next. What can you learn about sex from push-ups? In this illustration, Rhett got volunteered by his mom to come up on stage to do a bunch of push-ups. Steve asked Rhett how many he was confident that he could do. Rhett settled on the number 20. He said, I can definitely do 20 push-ups. So Steve had him get down in the ready position and then brought someone else from the audience up to stand on Rhett's back and then told Rhett, okay, now do your 20 push-ups. Rhett struggled to get off the ground and really only managed his chin and maybe his neck to get off the ground, but was unable to do even one. Now, this illustrated that Rhett wasn't a liar. He wasn't dishonest when he said that he could do 20. The real issue was that there was more weight. This addressed myth number 1, that the behavior is the problem. And when talking about a sexual addiction, the behavior is actually the result of the problem. Next is, what can you learn about sex from a vice? Not that anyone actually cares, but he was using a C-clamp and not a vice. But let's not get caught up in the details. So, in this illustration, Kelsey came on stage to put her finger in the vice. And when Steve started tightening it down and it got tight on her finger, she said, "Ouch," and he stopped. This illustrated the point that pain drives behavior. So when we see a behavior being exhibited, someone turning to a sexual escape, it's oftentimes a coping mechanism for pain that they're experiencing in their life. They view it as a way to distract themselves from the pain or a way to escape from the pain, even though it's temporary and it doesn't really solve anything. Next up is, what can you learn about sex from a rope? Here we had Ray Ramirez come up on stage while Steve put a big, thick rope around his torso. He told Ray, "Don't hold it with your hands, but stick it, right around here and walk away from me. Walk towards the back door in the auditorium." So Steve held the rope while Ray pulled against it, trying to walk out the door. Steve, leaned back and put his body weight against Ray, and eventually Ray was unable to continue, going towards his goal. He was stopped in his tracks. Then Steve told him, "Okay, turn around and face me, and don't touch the rope with your hands, and take 2 steps toward me, like you're going to punch me in the face." When Ray did this, the rope dropped to the ground. This illustrated the point that when we face our problem, only then can we escape from the hold that it has on us. If we constantly try to ignore it and just strive towards our goal, running away from our problem, it's going to weigh us down, and we're not going to be able to reach where we're trying to go, what our goal is. It's only when we turn around and face the problem head on that it loses the hold it has over us. Hang in there, only 2 more to go. What can you learn about sex from arm wrestling? In this illustration, we had Jace come up and try and arm wrestle Steve. Jace tried his best, but Steve won easily 3 or 4 times in a row. And Jace realized that he would never be able to beat Steve. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how many times he tried. I mean, maybe if he had waited, 30 more years until he was an adult and Steve was in his 70s, maybe, but that's not the point. The point was that once Steve said, "Okay, well, what other options do you have? What else can you do than try to beat me by yourself?" Jace looked out in the crowd and said, "I could probably get another person to help me." And Steve said, "Okay, pick somebody." And Jace looked out and he picked Ray Ramirez. And he said, "Ray, come on up here." So Ray came up and helped Jace beat Steve in arm wrestling. This illustrated the point that no matter how many times we try, no matter how hard we try to overcome a sexual addiction by ourselves, to escape from whatever behavior that we can't seem to stop doing, it won't work. It's impossible. We have to get help. And as Jace chose wisely, it's good for us to choose a person who would very likely be able to help us overcome whatever behavior that is. Last one. What can you learn about sex from a triangle? In this illustration, Steve used 3 volunteers and the rope that he used earlier. He tied a knot in the rope to make it all attached, and he had each of the 3 students take their hands around it and form a triangle and hold it tightly. His instructions were, no matter what happens, under no circumstances are you allowed to move your hands. Keep them perfectly still. So he went around and bumped or pushed each of the students, and when he did that, the other 2 students' hands moved slightly because of the weight that was put on the rope. And he pointed it out every time that hey, no, I saw your hands move. Let's do it again. So this illustrated the point that our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all connected. When we experience one, it affects the other two. Try this. Next time you experience some kind of behavior, draw a triangle, write the word behavior, thoughts, and feelings in the 3 respective corners. Write down whatever your behavior is, and then take a look at what you're thinking at that time and what feels true in that moment. You'll see that they're all connected. Knowing that this is how the triangle works, we can use it to our advantage. Once we isolate the behavior that we're trying to change, and we connect the dots of the thoughts and feelings that accompany that behavior or precede that behavior, we can step in and change the course before we even get to that behavior. Let's look at an example. Let's say that there's a female high school student who is getting bullied by another girl at school. In that moment of being bullied, she's having negative thoughts about herself, and she's feeling scared, rejected, hurt, unsafe. She may want to go and act out with her boyfriend sexually to regain those feelings of safety and acceptance and regain the position of power. So if she had sought out a mentor or a friend or a parent and said, hey, this happened at school today, and this is what a girl said to me and about me or did to me, we can seek the advice and the counsel and the wisdom of people who love us, people who will tell us the truth about what we're worth and help us find that safety and that acceptance rather than going and acting out in a negative way. It's a vicious trap that Satan puts us in because he uses those moments where we're being bullied or where something happens where we have those thoughts and feelings that are untrue about ourselves and what we're worth and who we are. And then he tempts us with the illusion of comfort through acting out sexually. So we can recognize that this is all a trap that Satan's putting in front of us. We can pinpoint those thoughts or feelings that we're starting to have, whatever the situation is, and turn to someone who we know will help us, who we know that we can trust, and we know that loves us, to help us change the course of where we have gone in the past in terms of what behavior comes next. So knowing this, knowing how the triangle works, can be a huge advantage to recovery from any kind of sexual behavior or sexual addiction that we may be struggling with. I just wanted to say thanks again so much for taking the time to do this together as a family. I really pray and hope that it has blessed your family and that it's been something that was good for you to experience together. If you wouldn't mind giving me some constructive criticism, I do want to try and make these interactive video lessons better in the future. I'm sure we'll be using them again at some point, so please, if you have any constructive criticism, any ideas that you think would make this experience better or more concise, please pass those along. I would love to hear your input on that. And if you did enjoy it, then I also encourage you to text another family tonight and say, hey, did you do that video lesson that Jason emailed out? You should, etc., etc. But thanks again so much for your time, and hope you have a good night.